There's an awful lot of news in the news, if that's possible, so we're going to get right into it. Mae Brussell to discuss and enlighten and raise questions. Mainly, you raise a lot of questions that never seem to have answers until, well, they do. A few weeks later, the answers come out.
Or a year later, yeah.
Or a year later. So there's a lot happening with the Watergate affair, as it is being called. And a lot happening with Arthur Bremer, which may also be the Watergate affair. You don't know.
James Ray, yeah.
James Ray. Why don't you pick a point and start?
Okay, should we tell them what dialogue assassination is? Dialogue conspiracy?
Dialogue conspiracy, okay. Let's tell them what that is.
Well, for those who haven't been listening for a long time, for a steady year, or haven't listened before, dialogue conspiracy came on the air to explain the conspiratorial process of the United States, mainly done through assassination. I'm a research worker in political assassinations, starting with the death of John Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, the Sharon Tate massacre, the Oda family massacre, the Wallace shooting. I follow political assassinations, who is affecting the course of elections, because every one of these things affects elections. Did you notice in the paper this week, Phil, there was an article that there's a pattern of prison riots at the same time that there's ghetto riots, and they happen during election years. And I said these are provocateurs. There was a very astute resume this week that there seems to be a wave of pattern that comes at certain years where prisons and ghettos and minorities riot. And many times on the show we talk about the provocateurs that are put there for electoral purposes, like Adolf Hitler did, to get law and order. And I sent a letter to various gentlemen up at San Quentin and said, lay low. If they want you to cut your hair, cut it. Obey, say yes, sir, because they're going to provoke a lot of riots the month of August while the Republican convention's going on. And I sort of laid out this blueprint, and this was happening about a month ago that I was talking about these riots, and there's been a rash of prison riots since that time, since that letter and message went out to them up there at the prison in San Quentin, because that's the only one where I have friends that I know of. But I would like, to be able to tell all of them, don't fall for their game, don't get worked up.
The word provocateur came up from Santa Cruz. It was mentioned in a Santa Cruz County grand jury report into the violence and the demonstration last May.
That's right.
The anti-war demonstrations, and the county grand jury, although they didn't say whether the provocateurs were organized or not,
or hired,
they did say that it appeared that there were provocateurs involved in the...
meaning not regular students, that's right.
People that were urging people on to violence.
And the law enforcement in Santa Cruz got mad and said, you didn't put the college there, didn't blame the students. That the responsibility should have come down on those terrible young people today who are rioting in the streets. This is what the law enforcement officials wanted. But the decision of the grand jury was that people outside the college community were provoking situations along with the policemen doing violent acts, and it wasn't the student body. Well, we've been on the air just 14 months, once a week, on dialogue, conspiracy, and assassination. And at that time, just as a 5-second review, when the Pentagon Papers broke, I said that America had one big problem, one big belch to get out, the really big problem. The Pentagon Papers revealed that we don't tell the truth, our public officials, that deception is carried along the line. There was no real plan for the Vietnam policy, and we planned the removal of DM, just like I know we did many heads of states, including the ones in our own country. And at that time, I said conspiracies were not a popular subject at all. They weren't in the news. But this week, I brought in, it's 1 year later, and I brought in a pile of articles, and we'll just have to skim through them, on the Sirhan case in Los Angeles, James Ray, Jim Garrison in New Orleans, and Clay Shaw, and the Watergate connected to the electoral process again. And the news is just filled with conspiracy and assassination murder cases.
While we have yet to begin on the specifics, let me bring up another article, too, because in programs past you've mentioned Greece and the United States involvement in Greece, and now the premier, the dictator, or whatever you want to call him in Greece, has just simply asked his whole cabinet to resign. He said goodbye to them.
Yeah.
How does that fit in with things? Have you analyzed that situation in Greece there?
Oh, yes, I follow Greece very closely, and the story that I did, the Watergate affair that is being distributed across the country now, that from the realist that we'll give you the address in a few minutes, that Paul Krasner published, mentions the relationship of Greece and the overthrow of Greece and the selection of Spiro Agnew. The reaction to the article so far, few people have read it, and it's in the hands of people. It's moving on now to the news media. The various members of the Senate and Congress be distributed by tomorrow to a lot of them. If this article is real, then Nixon has to be impeached as well as Agnew, and that's what I want. I want the vice president running with Richard Nixon, who was selected by the Greek military junta, removed from the candidacy in the next few weeks. I brought in, and this fits in with the conspiratory aspect of it, because Agnew is a conspiracy. He was put on us by a police state. He is not a Republican as such. I don't consider him a Republican as such. And Life magazine had an editorial. Last week they came out with an editorial about not having Agnew as vice president, and they followed it up with another one, and that they didn't want him as president. The LA Times had two editorials. They didn't want Agnew as vice president. And Life this week had an article by Hugh Sidey on the complacencies now of the Republicans, that they're just about a shoe in it. And it goes in that the next 4 weeks, they say, will be critical ones. But it looks like Nixon has everything going for him. He's got labor and John Connally and the Texans, and he let Jimmy Hoff out. He was paroled, and he has a Soul City going for Floyd McKissick and the Jewish support because of Israel. And then it said, unless something goes off, unlike the disaster of Culloden, that was a battle in Scotland, the McGregors this time will stand on a victorious field. That's Clark McGregor, who took over John Mitchell's position with the committee to re-elect Richard Nixon. It'll be interesting to see in the next 2 weeks what Life magazine has to say about Agnew and Nixon when some of this information comes out about Greece and Spiro Agnew. I follow the shuffling of the cabinet out there. I read today that Peru is becoming a total dictatorship with no freedom of the press. We're lining up total fascist countries against the communist bloc side by side. And as long as we're on the Watergate article, just briefly, I'm jumping around. There was an article this week in the paper that it just briefly mentioned. It didn't mention the names in the Mercury, but it mentioned on the television last week, during the week, that the accounting office, the General Accounting Office, and this is part related to Congress, will audit the finances of President Nixon's campaign because of possible links to the break-in at the Democratic Party headquarters. That money, there was money from Maurice Stan, Secretary of the Treasury, and John Mitchell, part of the committee to re-elect Richard Nixon. The money from that group, the committee, $25,000 of it that was earmarked for the president's campaign fund, was found in the pocket of Bernard Barker when he was arrested at the Watergate Hotel. And the newspaper said this is the first time that the bugging incident was related to the campaign finance law, that they were supposed to register a certain amount of money up to a date, and the rest would be made public. And that date was April the 7th, and supposedly this money was pulled out of the bank on April 25th. So they're going to trace that. This is the door open that could remove Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew. It's right through the Watergate door. But last night was the first acceptance of the major news media on all the networks of the money related from the Republican committee to the Watergate incident and the men arrested. But I wrote an article for 3 weeks. They were arrested on June the 17th, and the article went to the printers July the 11th. And the whole thing relates them to the committee, and the news has failed to face what was happening for 1 month. This is August the 2nd, and finally on August the 1st, they say, well, there's a link. Nobody could figure out why John Mitchell resigned. They could have found the link, just like they could find who shot Governor Wallace. We'll go into that in a second. But they're a little slow at doing things like you say. We talk about it, and it'll come in later because we've talked about this for 3 weeks now, and it'll be coming in. There was another article on the bugging incident and Nixon's aide being linked to the Watergate Hotel, which was interesting. And this is one of the most important articles, too, to come out, because a man who was in charge of the committee to re-elect Richard Nixon, the lawyer, the head lawyer for the whole committee, telephone calls were coming to his phone from Bernard Barker from Miami. But the important thing is that Charles Colson, who is in the White House, who supposedly hired one of the men, Howard Hunt, in the White House, who the arrested men had his name on their pockets when they were arrested, Charles Colson and Al Wong is from Secret Service, and he was supposed to have hired one of the men who was arrested to be chief of security at Miami at the time of the conventions. Charles Colson and Al Wong have been given an attorney by Richard Kleindienst of the Justice Department. The Attorney General of the United States has given them an attorney, Mr. Goldbleem, to represent their defense in the case, and he's prosecuting the case. The same Justice Department, the Attorney General that replaced John Mitchell, is prosecuting the Watergate affair, and he's sending the lawyers for the defense.
That's doesn't sound right.
Does it? No. Lawyers that I've spoken to just.
On what basis is he supplying the defense attorneys?
Well, what I'm trying to point out, Phil, on this program, and I try hard every week, is to say that we have a actual dictatorship that kills the opponents in an electoral year, or else intended to overthrow the government this year, and that when you talk about Greece, it's easy to look way over there and say, well, the premier shuffles his cabinet without any concern. That's what we do. We pull people in. We don't have any say over who our cabinet is. Nixon's had the biggest shuffle of people of any president. They walk in and walk out with no excuse. It's just like John Mitchell steps down from one job and steps out of another where he's directly linked to a criminal case here. But the Justice Department, and I've tried to say this for a long time, does not represent finding justice. We can go into this now with the Arthur Bremer case where it's so obvious how the FBI, who I know not only was in on the whole planning of the thing, but is letting Bremer go. Their whole prosecution from the FBI, the main witness said Bremer didn't even hold a gun. Or no proof they did. We'll go into that. But the point is on the Watergate story that the Justice Department, the Attorney General, is sending the lawyers to defend to the men, and he's doing the prosecuting.
Well, how does he justify, again, sending, Justice Department attorneys to defend them? Is it because of their positions in the White House?
He justifies it. Well, he has to take this because it involves the White House. There's no civilian lawyer that knows the mischief the White House is into. There's no one that knows what the White House has done for the last 20 years. And there's no one in the last 10 years that I have studied that has any idea how Richard Helms of the CIA or Richard Nixon or John Mitchell run this country.
Now,
and they can't send in. He says there'll be no conflict of interest. He was asked, is there a conflict of interest? He says, no, because we won't let our criminal department see what the civil department's doing. They're just about a hair's breadth away.
Well, the military also provides both sides.
That's right.
Military cases, in Billy Smith's case, although Billy Smith has one civilian defense attorney.
Well, I question
he has
that.
two military defense attorneys and two military lawyers are prosecuting him.
Yeah.
So it does happen in the government.
Well, I'd have to know more about Luke McKissick because of...
Luke McKissick is the attorney for
I know. He's
civilian
what you
attorney.
call a
I'm
civilian.
just trying to clarify.
I'm trying to clarify whether he's still military. You see, the men that work for the Warren Commission, the lawyers that work for all of the assassination cases like Percy Foreman or F. Lee Bailey are military lawyers. They just wear street clothes, but they work for the military and only the military cases.
Any proof of that?
Well, I have a documentation from lawyers in the Southwest that every trial lawyer that comes in on the assassination cases is assigned from Muscle Shoals, Alabama. And I don't have the linking of McKissick to that, but we'll go right into after we do the Wallace today, we'll go into the Sirhan, and I'll show you the kind of evidence that Luke McKissick allows Sirhan to sit on at San Quentin with. At first it was death row, now it's commuted to life in jail, where the case would be overturned. If he could have the attorney he wanted, I'm sure it could be overturned, because he's tried to get him, and they won't let McKissick off the case. And that's another way that they're assigned, because you can't fire them. They just sit there. You can't get rid of them.
About the Watergate affair, May, before we leave it completely, do you think that that the Watergate affair, the fact that the Republicans are being tied, in the White House specifically, is being tied to the break-in at Democratic headquarters in Washington, D.C., do you think that's going to eventually have a great effect on the election? Or do you think that eventually it's going to be explained away and covered up?
Well, about 4 people who saw the advance copies of the Watergate affair story that I did said it. I don't like to put it in grandiose terms. Wait and see. Let's let them. Their reaction was that it was just unreal. That if this was true, of course it would affect the elections. But then I used to have a fantasy that I could stop the elections in 1972 on the basis of all the information I had. That if we could get it to the people, it would be possible to have Congress halt them and examine all the candidates and get that funding out and find out if Richard Nixon is a clandestine agent and not a Republican, and if Agnew is selected by a clandestine group and not the Republican Party. See, these men don't go to any Republican meetings. They don't have to campaign on the streets. The excuse is violence, but they don't relate to the Republican Party. When Nixon wanted to decide in 1967, it went to the law office in New York, and John Mitchell was at another law office, and their offices merged. And Mitchell and Nixon had a meeting, and it was decided that John Mitchell would run Nixon's campaign. And then Nixon told all the Republican governors that came to him, don't see me. I don't want to see you. You're to contact John Mitchell, Well, a man who has lost for the Senate in California and who's lost for governor of California and wanted the office so badly in those years would welcome any Republican governors who want to see him, because this is how you run campaigns. You don't throw the Republican governors away. But he referred them all to John Mitchell. Then John Mitchell goes to Congress and to speak to about 15 Republicans in the House. And he met them, and he says, I'm John Mitchell. I'm going to manage Richard Nixon's campaign. You're going to want to see me, but you can't see me because I'll reach you, and you may not like what I'm doing. This is, in fact, what he said. But we'll get this thing on, and he'll win. And when you're ready, I'll meet with you. You won't be able to see me. That's not the way you run a campaign in the United States, if you want the high-ranking Republicans in the country.
So you don't think that the last of the Watergate affair has been heard yet?
Oh, Phil, please, let us see.
I've got to ask.
I don't know. You evidently haven't read it yet, or you wouldn't ask that question.
Well, I've been doing this show for so long, if you could recite it.
No. The funny thing is that we've been doing this show on
Well,
here.
I mean, I've listened to this show, and been on the show for a long time, and it's having a great effect on people in the area that the station covers.
Yes.
And I have read the article, and I happen to think, personally, that the article has some incredible things to say, which if picked up by the right people could really knock a few people over. But, the fact that the article is written and the fact that I believe that...
doesn't mean that they will.
Right, and that's why I ask you...
Well, I have a few things going in my favor with the article, and that's this, that a lot of good books have been done about the assassination. A lot of evidence of conspiracy has been put out. But the things that I have going are several factors. In the first place, Richard Nixon said, please don't pursue the suit because it'll damage me. So he knows it's important. The second thing is that John Mitchell resigned because of the Watergate, so it's explosive. And the third thing is that Martha Mitchell is still an actual prisoner, and you get a lot of women's lib or human interest people wondering, well, what really happened to her. She isn't with her child, and no one hears from her, and she's a physical prisoner who's been injected and locked away, like she's a criminal. All she has done is seen a crime committed, and they've locked her away, which means that we're all capable of being, administered the same treatment at any moment. So because there's a woman involved, and because John Mitchell quietly slipped away, like the Washington Post had an article last night saying that Larry O'Brien came out and said it was perfectly obvious because of the links of the telephones and the connections of the people arrested at the Republican Committee that John Mitchell didn't resign because of his wife wanting him at home. Well, the article goes into that at great length. She wanted him to be in the Justice Department. She didn't mind his long hours. She just didn't want to be witness to a crime. And they also could go to jail for it if they harbored criminals, because one of the men arrested was employed by him. You see, so you've got all of these things happening, and then besides the woman's interest story, the suit pending, which Nixon knows will hurt it, and all of the press isn't for Nixon. If all of the press that's for McGovern publishes a part of this story, then the Nixon people will print it because it sells, not because they want to. They print a lot of good stuff on all these things, conspiracies and assassination, because they're there to make money. Besides, then, I mentioned before, if Life and Time and LA Times are actually afraid of Agnew, and I think he should be impeached and investigated, then why wouldn't they grab the story if the documentation is there? They've already said what they think about him, that he's a danger. They imply he's a danger to the country, he's dividing, and so forth. So adding all those things up and given enough documentation, I think we'll get some action.
No, we'll see. Okay,
Yeah,
we'll be moving on to an equally involved story concerning, I see, Arthur Bremer.
Yeah,
there have been late developments in that.
For weeks we were talking on these shows about Oswald and Ray and Sirhan and the other assassinations. And then when Wallace was shot, there was a lot of interest at the studio. Remember, people called up and they wanted to know what was happening, with Wallace, and was it a political assassination? And remember, we did the show on Saturday. He was shot on Monday, and I gave all the reasons why I thought it was a conspiracy. And in the following week...
You also made a statement, if my memory serves me correct, which was fairly incredible at the time, but it seems a little bit more believable. And if my memory is right, you said that Arthur Bremer didn't shoot George Wallace.
It sounded incredible.
And with the fact that it had been filmed by a CBS cameraman and had been witnessed by a crowd of people, and the fact that he had been captured immediately after the shooting, that seemed like almost an insane statement to make, but some testimony in the trial makes you wonder about that.
Well, this is the same kind of thing after I'd been working on the John Kennedy murder for so many years, and then Sirhan killed Robert Kennedy, and there was certain evidence coming in on that, and then when I realized and mentioned the man who is suspected of shooting him, Thane Cesar, from the back of the head, and the autopsy said 1 inch from the back of the head, and I was communicating with my family in L.A., talking on the phone, and my mother said, she wrote me a letter, Mae, now you've really flipped. You've done the Oswald thing, but everyone knows that dirty little, and then she goes into all these ethnic excursions and criticisms of that little runch, from that place, way over there, and all. That he did it, and if everybody saw it, then you are blowing your mind because you're so much into conspiracies that you can't keep your head straight. Well, I brought in an article that was published this week on the destruction of the right arm of the coat of Robert Kennedy also. This is new material for me. The left shirt and coat sleeves and the cufflinks have been thrown away. They were cut off of his coat. And I don't want to jump around too much, but the evidence on the tampering of Robert Kennedy's coat and the bullets and the guns and so forth, and the 10 bullets there, and Sirhan's gun only shot 8. I didn't say at the time that Bremer didn't shoot him. What I said was, and I said it right off the bat because I can still add to 8, and I'm lucky if I can do that these days. I said that there were 5 shots in Governor Wallace. The New York Times had pictures in the doctor's report. There were 5 shots that they admitted in Governor Wallace. Now it seems that there were many more. But there were 3 people at the shopping center that were also shot, a woman and a man and another guard who had 6 hours surgery. And it seems that 2 people were put in the hospital that day and just thrown out and played down, and nobody knew how bad they were hurt. But one of the women came to the trial. Yes, the one woman came. She's still on crutches and her leg in a cast, and she's in bad shape. So she obviously needed a lot of medical care, but they whisked her out of the hospital that day to not make a thing. But there were 3 people at the shopping center that were shot, and 5 bullets in Wallace, and nobody mentioned that the 3 people were directly behind Wallace, which was similar to there was a diversionary again, and like the Ambassador Hotel And Bremer yelled out something like, "Hey, where does he come by?" or something like that, those effects. There was this diversionary. And there were 8 bullets, 3 people injured, seriously, and Wallace had 5, and they weren't standing behind him, and it was a 5-gun revolver. Computer and Automation came out just this month with what I was adding up, back in May at the time of the shooting. In July 1972 has an article on the shooting of presidential candidate George Wallace, and it goes into the New York Times article of the 5-bullet capacity of the gun that Bremer had. Then it goes into the bullets. 1 bullet passed through the upper arm and another through the right forearm, and 1 or both of 2 wounds in his chest could have been caused by bullets through the arm first. It would be hard to, you have to see where his arm would be, that he has 2 holes in the chest, and 1 in the right shoulder, 1 in the left shoulder. Then he had a bullet in his stomach, and that's the one that is causing him all the trouble in drainage, because it broke his intestine and the waste matter got all inside of his stomach. We talked about the serious surgery he had. Then they couldn't do the bullet on the spine that lodged in his spine because the stomach surgery was so serious, and he had the shoulder and the 2 arm bullets. But the stomach one was really the serious one. And then the doctor's report came out May 17th talking about 2 superficial wounds in his back and another one in his abdominal cavity. Well, that added up to 8 inside of Mr. Wallace, and there were 3 more people. So Computer and Automation finds that they have 13 from 11 to 13 bullets. If his arm is over his chest, then they have 11 bullets. Otherwise, there's 13. So they said, what happened to the bullets? Nobody has connected the bullets to the gun that Bremer had. And we'll go into the removal of Bremer to the Maryland jail and how the prisoners objected to the special treatment he was getting. But we could jump right to the trial this week. Choosing the jury took 1 hour.
That's pretty quick.
That took 1 hour. The prosecution met Tuesday rather. The prosecution was through in 1 day. But the prosecution was a bunch of psychiatrists who said he didn't know what he was doing. But then the defense went on, and Mr. Frazier, the same FBI man that did the ballistics work for the Warren Commission, it said, I'm reading a quotation from the newspaper, the defense had neither admitted or denied that it was Bremer who pulled the trigger of the gun that wounded Wallace, but widely published photographs showing him at the moment of the assault and afterwards being subdued. 2 FBI experts acknowledged that they had been unable to find Bremer's fingerprints on the gun, and this is exactly like all fingerprints on the gun, used in the shooting, and they were unable to trace the fired bullets to the gun and could not find powder residue on Bremer's hands. Now, sometimes I talk about Dallas in 1963, that there were no fingerprints of Oswald's on the gun. There was no paraffin on the tests on his cheek or hands. It was negative. Oswald didn't fire a gun. And people say, well, how is that possible? You've got 26,000 exhibits and FBI experts. This is the same Frazier that said there was no fingerprints of Oswald's on the gun who's saying it here. And he's having a trial. The prosecution ended yesterday. Now they're on the defense. They chose the jury in 1 hour. If this isn't a railroaded thing when they had suspects changing license plates, for those of you who didn't hear the earlier shows, there was a suspect in Maryland that was changing his license plates. He weighed 220 pounds, 6'2", heavy-set, dark fellow. A man up in Michigan, Milwaukee Ferry, saw Bremer with 2 other men. One was 225 pounds, 6'2", dark complected. Bremer checked in at the Waldorf Astoria. There was no discussion what floor he stayed on, who he stayed with, the Lord Elgin Hotel. I have information he stayed at the same floor as a CIA agent. In L.A., they have his name. The one who stayed at the Lord Elgin Hotel, he's with the CIA agent up in Canada when he was up there. Now, this goes into the problem, again, which I mentioned in the article 2 or 3 times, I think, that Patrick Gray III has not been appointed head of the FBI, and he should be removed from any nomination or from any office in the Justice Department. His first case after J. Edgar Hoover was killed and this was to consolidate the CIA to take care of the Justice Department. His first case was the Bremer case. And the second big case is the Watergate. Well, if the FBI found no fingerprints of Bremer's on the gun, and they had no bullet tracings, no bullets to prove, they didn't even find a bullet to prove that it matched the gun, and no tests on Bremer, then why did the FBI close the case?
Okay, well, let's answer that question, or at least bring it up again after we identify the station and the program. This is Dialogue Conspiracy with political research specialist Mae Brussell. You're listening to it on KLRB FM Carmel, 24 hours. Long time, 14 months of weekly hour-long programs.
Dude, that's a long time. It went fast.
Yeah, it's going very fast.
But everything, like we talk about things on this show, and almost every one of the things that I say that has documentation should be making a headline if it's true. Just the kind of information that's coming out, and the people in the community have absorbed it. But when I put it down in printing, then, and begin to publish it, then it's going to really make a lot of ripples. People have to sit and hold it and see it.
Now, regarding the testimony of the FBI at the Bremer trial concerning the fact that they couldn't find his fingerprints on the gun, that they couldn't find powder burns on his hands, and they couldn't trace the bullets that were found in Wallace to that gun that Bremer was alleged to have had. I've heard one explanation offered. The psychoanalyst, one of the doctors that examined Bremer, says that he washed blood off of Bremer's hands before the paraffin test was made.
Well, they could wash the blood off the hands, but how do they count the bullets? And why can't they find the bullets? You see, when the bullet was taken out of the back of Wallace, why didn't they match it to the gun that he was supposed to allegedly have if they're going to prosecute the case? So
you suspect that possibly there are, that although Bremer may have fired a weapon and may have indeed fired a weapon at Wallace and hit him, that there were others involved?
Yes. Well, the FBI, I'm accusing the FBI of planning the murder, and I accuse them because I know what they did in the past murders, and I accuse them of not wanting to find evidence. You see, Bremer had a car, and the FBI didn't pick up that car. It had a gun in it. The FBI examined that car really carefully and went through that car. But the car actually had a gun in it. And why wouldn't the FBI find it when somebody else can come along and pull a gun out of that car and never mention the fact of whether or not it matched those bullets? You see, there's a report here. It's in Computer and Automation, and also it was in the newspapers, that Edward Walsh and Bob Woodward of the Washington Post, this is May the 19th, said the police in Prince George's County, Maryland, yesterday found a 14-shot semi-automatic pistol used as a military weapon in Bremer's car, and the local police discovered the 9mm weapon after the FBI had thoroughly searched Bremer's 1968 Rambler, and there is no explanation of the FBI, which searched Bremer's car, failed to discover that second weapon. Now, the FBI is coming to the prosecution of the case, and I think, follow this, like I say, the FBI has planned past political assassinations, and each of one of those, Nixon gained the votes. If Wallace is killed this time, Nixon gets those busing votes up in Michigan, Maryland, and the South. The FBI came in on the case to investigate it immediately. Bremer went to the hospital for stitches, and they called the White House. What should we do? And the White House says he can go and get medical care if the FBI accompanies him. And when he walked out of that hospital or treatment center, he was under the custody of the FBI, and the local police never had him again. But the local police searched his car. And first the FBI then searched his car, and they found nothing. He had no gun. The car was searched by the local police. The local police found this weapon in the car. I'll go on to read more about it. Now they want to prosecute a case. The FBI sends their gun expert to say he didn't have fingerprints on the gun. How does the FBI prosecute Bremer? They're letting him off. You see, if all the evidence is in his favor, the prosecution is saying there's no evidence he shot anybody. See, what kind of prosecution is that? Is that a conflict? I mean, figure that one out. But the Computer and Automation says it goes into the traveling of Bremer in Milwaukee. He left his job February the 15th and went to Ottawa and stayed at that Lord Elgin Hotel and went to the Waldorf Astoria. And he bought guns, tape recorder, a portable radio with a police band. There was a radio with a police band in the killing of Martin Luther King, in the James Ray thing, and the John Kennedy, the band, the Tippit killing. There were police bands connected to all of these murders. No, the Sirhan didn't have a radio control. He went right for the Ambassador. There wasn't a radio band in there that I know of. There may be people around the Ambassador who were in on it, but that didn't play. These other three had this radio band that goes, the police band on it. But then the FBI went around to everybody and told them not to talk. The instructions of the FBI, in the case in Milwaukee and wherever he was, were don't talk. Now, in the article that I did for The Realist, I mentioned a lot of funny coincidences. They're not funny, I just gave a few there, but in the research there's always funny things because the bank that Bremer used Milwaukee is called the Mitchell Bank, the Mitchell Street Bank. I mean, that's in case he forgot where his money was at. It's at the Mitchell Street Bank. I thought that was funny. Like when James Ray, the alleged killer of Martin Luther King, was down in Portugal, he went to the Dallas, there was a Dallas bank down there, Dallas, a bar in Portugal. But he's at the Mitchell Bank in Milwaukee. And the FBI went everywhere and told them not to talk. Well, the Computer and Automation said agents of the FBI who went to all possible sources and told them not to talk to newsmen, and such instructions by the FBI are illegal. Now, if they're illegal, this has happened in every one of these cases that the FBI canvassed the whole town and said to everybody, if you've seen him with someone or you know something, don't talk to newsmen, don't talk, as if you'll ruin our chance of investigating, and then they don't investigate, and the dumb people are left with the information. That's what happened down in Dealey Plaza when Mark Lane wrote his book about Rush to Judgment. They told everyone not to talk, and they obeyed, and the Warren Commission didn't do anything, and he collected everyone who didn't talk, and they had all the information. The witnesses didn't have the information. So Computer Automation said instructions by the FBI are illegal and have no force of law. They can't arrest you at all for saying what you know. Furthermore, instructions are wrong in a democracy because they prevent the public from knowing what the public has a right to know. And it is regrettable that people take at face value misinformation they receive from the FBI. Now, this is what happened at the Watergate Hotel. The man who manages the hotel in Washington was told by the FBI, don't talk to anybody, don't talk to newsmen, the librarian at the White House. You can't talk to anybody, the Washington Post. And there were direct links between what these people were doing and the people arrested. And they were shut up. So the Bremer case went to trial. We're ending up with like 11 to 13 bullets. And the case has gone to trial. They selected the jury in 1 hour. The prosecution, which said he didn't have a gun, lasted 1 day. The television this week made a disgusting statement. They said, the defense tomorrow will bring in his mother and father, and then you'll know that he's mentally deranged, and that it was just a mental problem. As if a person from a lower economic class, the boy was spending thousands of dollars, they want to pass it off. There was another remark about the FBI by a man who is going to be in charge of security for this 4-day trial, Mr. Ansel, in Maryland. He attended a conference on security down in Palm Springs, and he went to the Wax Museum where he saw a statue of Oswald being carried away by the sheriffs, and he visualized himself in Maryland, being in the Wax Museum today carrying off Bremer, which is hardly going to happen. And he goes into the fact that it's very unusual that the FBI is taking care of the whole trial. He really won't have to do it. He says, although Ansel, I'm reading, this is from the Washington Post, he says, although Ansel didn't admit it, the FBI will retain control of Bremer, even at the Upper Marlboro Courthouse, and have the ultimate responsibility for his safety. Now it says, in the case of Bremer, however, the White House is known to have ordered the FBI, usually limited only to investigating, to have complete custody of the suspect. Now, everything is unusual in these cases. You see, the FBI is going to have control of him. Their excuse being, we don't want to bungle what happened, like with Lee Harvey Oswald. You see how beautiful that was. If they were in on the killing of Lee Harvey Oswald, then they could control every other assassin, because you killed the first one, the first patsy that you arrest, that you say did it, whose fingerprints weren't on the gun and didn't own a gun. You kill him because he said for 2 days, I didn't kill anybody, and there's no proof that he killed anybody. Then every other suspect who may be part of a conspiracy but didn't actually shoot the gun, like James Ray or Sirhan, who shot a gun but didn't do the fatal bullets, or in this case you get Bremer, and we keep adding these up. In all of these cases, the FBI says, no, I have to isolate you. Like, if I'm not going to kill you like I killed Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald, I'm going to isolate you because you may be killed like Oswald. So it's just a living death, no matter how you slice it. Nobody else gets to see them or let them tell people. Because, see, Oswald was alive for 2 days, for those of you who don't remember who Lee Harvey Oswald was, the alleged assassin of John Kennedy. And all the time he said he was innocent and didn't kill anybody, and then he was killed. And the police department. So the FBI says, well, as long as Oswald was killed, nobody can see these men, you see. So the FBI is taking care of this place, and Mr. Ansell's saying, I won't have much to do with it. Now,
what do you think of the FBI being the only ones to be in on the investigation for the state trial of Bremer?
It's terrible. It's terrible. Well, they did it when John Kennedy was killed. In Dallas, the judge and the coroner's office blocked the hospital, Parkland Hospital. They said this is an ordinary homicide. We're going to do the autopsy. And they said, no, we're taking that to a military hospital. You know, they took it to Bethesda, Maryland. They grabbed the body and ran. That's Larry O'Brien, the body snatcher. They took that body and ran. I think it's terrible. I don't think that the people who are planning these things should be investigating them, even if they didn't plan them. The local people should be able to do all the ballistics, get into the area, and handle it themselves. And when the local people do it and the FBI doesn't do it, then they're CIA agents. I'll jump right to the LA Police Department, which is nothing but the CIA. Is not even a civil police department for the most part. It's controlled for all these major conspiratorial cases. It investigates them, it helps plan them, and it investigates them. The one more thing about the Bremer thing, Mr. Ansell said it now appears that during the trial, Bremer will live up in a special jail at Upper Marlboro Jail under the FBI guard, and the FBI was reluctant to ferry him back and forth in town, so they will stay with him. They will guard him. They investigated him. They closed the case when the gun had no proof. I mean, the FBI has to be investigated. I've said this while I'm doing my research, 9 years. I've been, writing to public officials for 4 or 5 years. The fact that it's coming to a head in an election year is too bad, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. It's all coming to a point. I've said, like Reagan says, the next election will determine the course of history for 1,000 years in America, and I feel he's right. I know it will. This 1972 election, if you vote for this kind of a police state, and that's what it is, you don't have to believe me on the Dallas. You don't have to do research on the Martin Luther King or John or the Robert Kennedy, but just take Bremer that's happening today, this week, and read your paper, read the computer and automation, and follow it yourselves if you don't want to go back, because this is so easy to see. Once I explain the blueprint of how they don't count the bullets, they don't match the bullets to the gun, they have no proof that he shot the gun, and he can get off. This was the agreement. See, Bremer is sitting with the same arrangement they promised Lee Harvey Oswald, because he was supposed to go to college in the fall after that assassination, that if he didn't own a gun and there was no proof that he did it, he could be arrested as a decoy. And then all the people who did the shooting and the crossfire were flown out of town with the assistance of the military. Then when Oswald went to trial, he would be free because there'd be no proof he did it. And that worked for Oswald, and it didn't work for Oswald because then they killed him 2 days later. But maybe, it's funny that the script was written according to extensive research, which I do every day, every week, and, continuously, the way it lined up. And I'm going to someday write a book called Decoy into Patsy, how you hire a man, what his associations were, his funding, his connections, and then how you turn him into a patsy and make him the man responsible for the crime and who actually did it, the roles that switch. Well, it obviously seems that Bremer is decoy for a silencer or a second gunman, and that on the condition that he doesn't talk, he'll be he'll probably get off.
Bremer did a lot of traveling before the Wallace attempted assassination, and he spent some sums of money, and as he said, he stayed in a very ritzy New York hotel.
Well, yeah.
Has there been any explanation as to where he got the money?
Absolutely no. That's what's so horrendous about it, is that Patrick Gray doesn't, who's the acting head of the FBI, has not said what floor he stays on the Waldorf, whether he had one room and there were two people in it, or whether there were two people, or the three that he was with in Michigan. They don't want it. They don't have to explain anything. That's the thing. They're investigating and they're closing it. There should have been an all-out search for the second gunman if this is August and they knew in May that his fingerprints weren't on the gun, and then even if the FBI mistakenly missed that gun that the police found, did any of the bullets match that gun that were slipped into his car, and then he's made responsible. Now we're going to go on, if I can get past that noise in the other studio that they're making. Yesterday, the court said that Jim Garrison could not prosecute Clay Shaw. That was decided that he could not bother that poor man anymore. Jim Garrison arrested Clay Shaw for being part of a conspiracy to kill John Kennedy, that he knew Lee Harvey Oswald and David Ferrie, and that Clay Shaw was an important link in New Orleans to the John Kennedy assassination. And the main witnesses that Garrison would have had fled to California, Texas, and Ohio, and were never extradited, and the others were offered juicy promises and bribes, to not help Jim Garrison with the case. So the jury could not convict on a conspiracy. They could not convict him for being responsible for the entire conspiracy, or a conspiracy to kill John Kennedy. So Garrison slapped a charge on him the minute the trial was over for perjury, because Clay Shaw said he didn't know Lee Harvey Oswald and he didn't know David Ferrie. Well, David Ferrie was killed by a karate chop about one day after Clay Shaw was arrested, and David Ferrie was a very important link to the assassination, also the men arrested at the Watergate Hotel. One of the men arrested at the Watergate Hotel was brought in and questioned by the FBI because of an assassination plan to kill John Kennedy in Miami and his relationship to the whole group. So the David Ferrie was dead, like Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby. It's hard to have a trial like that. They all are lopped off. And right away, Jim Garrison knew about 21 people that had seen Clay Shaw with Ferrie or Oswald. So he slapped a perjury trial. Well, the United States court blocked it and said you can't have a perjury trial, and they just threw it out. The reason is that it persecutes Clay Shaw. Now, Clay Shaw is linked into the Galen operation and into the infiltration of Nazis in America and to the fascist organizations in Spain and Italy and England through the International Trade Mart in New Orleans. And
those are very broad statements to make.
Yeah, well, if this thing opens up in Congress, Nixon's funding will go all the way. We'll go for every mileage. It could go on for a year or two. People could sweep in with all the documentation, including myself, within a minute, and put it there. I've stood by everything I've said on this program. I challenge anybody, anytime, incidentally, if you are an old listener or a new listener, and you want to challenge my statements, and you may not like them, and you may not agree with them, because you don't like what I'm saying. But if you want to challenge anything that I'm saying and prove me wrong, I would welcome the chance to have a discussion with you. There's no one in the nation who can defend the Warren report, and there's no one who's met a researcher that would have a public debate on the evidence. So we'll go.
Okay, they can write the station or write you care of the station, or best thing is to write, or they can phone the station, leave a message.
Maybe we better take a break and give the address for the realist, because the copies on the peninsula, and Paul's going to run out of, they're going to go pretty fast. He'll keep printing as many as they want, but he's giving a few thousand away to get it started, and then the others are going out by subscription only, and I'll leave some off at the Odyssey. I hope they'll carry them. But if you want to subscribe and get it in the mail the next few weeks, it's in care of the realist, 595 Broadway, New York 10012. It's $3 for the year. And you'll get your $3 worth in the first
Yeah,
first article.
yeah, good $3 worth of reading. And also some very entertaining.
Oh, the articles are fantastic. The other articles. You like that cartoon about Rose America?
Rose America. Yeah. There's so it's worth $3. You could pay $3 for that one issue and not feel cheated.
Yeah. Paul's done a cartoon with the artist from Mad Magazine called Rose America's Baby, an insert in the Realist, and the Rose America is a Statue of Liberty, and she gives birth to Siamese twins. She says, no wonder it hurts too much, and I'll nurture both until one kills the other one off. And then after that cartoon, it breaks right into my story of that we have two governments, one hidden, one concealed, and one in the open, and they're killing each other. They're fighting each other off. And that's exactly it. I think the cartoon is just a stroke of genius. It's really a far-out cartoon, and it's great. But
well, and again, we should say that the Realist contains the article on the Watergate that you wrote and a couple of other articles, right?
Yeah, the creation of the false motive, and then how Nixon came to be president. It's all one thing, really. No matter how you take it, it all ties. It should all tie together. You know, if you can't see the connections by the time you're through with those three, we'll give you 3 more the next month. Okay. Well, this week, the court said that Jim Garrison was persecuting Clay Shaw. A lot of people say to me, what's happened to Jim Garrison? And we've done shows how the Justice Department, the same Justice Department that does a lot of other planning of evidence, planted evidence against Jim Garrison and tried to discredit him and tried to get him to go to jail on accepting money from pinball rackets machine. And he was cleared of those. The court hasn't cleared him yet of the charge, but there's no way to go to court. But a gentleman, Pershing Gervais, has surfaced and said that all this was planted by the Justice Department and paid by them just to discredit Jim Garrison for what he tried to do. The Monterey Herald this week had a nice article about the case.
It's from the Associated Press.
Yeah, from the Associated Press, and they said that Jim Garrison is formally announced he'll be a candidate for the Louisiana Supreme Court. I tried to get the Democratic Party through contacts with people in San Francisco and in Washington if they were naming a vice president to name Jim Garrison. Because with the Watergate thing, see, all of those boys that were arrested relate to what Jim Garrison was saying when he arrested Clay Shaw. And Jim knows all about the troops, the ex-combatientes, and the Bay of Pigs, and the people who wanted to kill Kennedy, and the banking. And he could open up the truth for this country. And that's the man I would like to see president someday. But
let's move on to the Kurski article.
Okay, when
because we mentioned it already once. We just have about
5 minutes.
About 7 minutes.
Okay, when Sirhan was arrested in the Ambassador Hotel, and they say, "What's your name?" and "How old are you? Where do you live?" and he wouldn't answer for any of the questions, but all he kept saying to the police department was, "Do you know Jack Kurski?" And that seemed to be a key word, like don't beat me up or don't cut me because I'm one of you boys. And it seems that the Jack Kurski case was investigated by a criminalist by the name of D. Wayne Wolfer, a forensic chemist named D. Wayne Wolfer, who later was to investigate the Sirhan case, and he tampered with the evidence in both cases, and he turns out that he hardly has any certification, like the coroner in L.A., and there's a case coming up now to open up the Kurski case. Jack Kurski is a deputy district attorney who was accused of murdering his wife and her lover in 1967. And there's a 190-page document now which charges Dwayne Wolfer, L.A. Police Department chief forensic chemist, with willful and perjurious testimony at the time of the Jack Kurski case. And when this article came out this week about Mr. Wolfer being questioned on the perjury, again, in all A there was a news blackout. The Kurski case took I'm reading from the Los Angeles Star now that covered the case. At the time that he was accused of murdering his wife and his lover, it took as much space in the press as the Tate, LaBianca, and the Kennedy. But when Wolfer turns out to be accused of perjury and lying on the evidence of the case that it couldn't have happened the way he said it did, none of the news media picked it up. AP, UP, LA Times. Only the lone LA Star picked it up. Well, that's like when Garrison was framed, the AP, UP, Life and Time photographed him being carted away handcuffed. When Gervais said he was framed by the Justice Department, only the New Orleans State's Item carried it. So you have the LA Star going, and it said there is a direct link, and this is where we go to Sirhan if you don't know the name Kurski. There are both direct and indirect links to the Sirhan Kennedy case, which should have made this case of considerable interest to the Associated Press or LA Times, particularly of the direct links in this case, because the head of the Los Angeles Police Department Crime Lab, Dwayne Wolfert, testified as an expert in both these cases, and his testimony was crucial to the conviction of both Sirhan and Jack Kershke. Barbara Blair, a Los Angeles attorney, said in May 1971 that Wolfert had violated the basic precepts of ballistics analysis in these two cases, and a third one also, Mr. Terry, of Sirhan and Kershke, and an independent criminologist, Pasadena criminalist William Harper, who served as a defense expert in the Kershke case. He represented Jack Kershke in the defense, got interested in certain discrepancies, and after the trial, he went to examine the ballistic evidence. And then he went into the Sirhan case because he realized that Wolfert had really fouled up this evidence. And then when the Sirhan case came along, it was the same thing, and it was the same man working for the LAPD. So the forensic chemist went into the case. Now, I brought a copy here of a letter which I had. It was also mentioned in the Star. A criminalist by the name of Marshall Hoots in Trauma magazine wrote a public article and a letter to Evel Younger about the Kershke case and Dwayne Wolfert, and he had said that, in effect, that you're ruining the credibility of research people and doing investigations. And he says that the job was done so poorly by Dwayne Wolfert and the LA Police Department that it's a discredit to the academic profession. And he said in his letter, I have no personal interest in the matter, but I have an academic concern in Wolfert's horrendous blunders in the past and those he will continue to commit in the future if he's allowed his present assignment. See, Dwayne Wolfert was about to be promoted as the head criminalist again in civil service this last year, and it was held up because he fouled the evidence on the prosecution that convicted Sirhan and Jack Kershke that didn't even fit the basic precepts of criminology. So it was held up, and then they begged him, various criminalists, and I have a list of affidavits and declarations of famous people who've done forensic chemistry and so forth, begged him not to promote Wolfert to a position, and Evel Younger did it. On March 24th this year, he made Dwayne Wolfert chief criminalist again. And these people had written a letter saying that the evidence in the case should be straightened out. And they go into, they say that Wolfert misrepresented the evidence in the case. And he said that he had had anatomy courses, and they went to the chairman of the anatomy department at USC. And the teacher, Dr. Paddock, said, it's false, it's not true, it's contrary to my personal knowledge that he took these courses. See, in L.A., we had Brian Stewart, the coroner, saying justifiable homicide of ripping off people down in L.A., blacks and Chicanos, and he turned out not to be a doctor or a lawyer. Now you have Dwayne Wolfert saying, I have certain credits and courses, and they're saying it's absolutely not true. You didn't have those courses. You see the pattern, Phil, running through this thing of phony credits prosecuting people on evidence that doesn't hold up, and the scientific data examined, and then they go into the question of the ballistics of the Sirhan case. If time's winding up, we'll go back to this next week because I think it's really important.
Also, we'll get into the Kennedy destruction of evidence you mentioned.
Oh, yeah, because they brought up the question. Here's a list of questions. It's from the L.A. Star that they asked an investigation of Mr. Wolfert. And they asked him, it says also missing, Mr. Wolfert, bullets were missing, the gun that Sirhan used was thrown away, and they couldn't find it. And they said also missing somewhere were Kennedy's left shirt and coat and sleeve and cufflink. And what about that? He said, well, to my knowledge, I wouldn't know where it is. They said, would your notes help you to recall where those things are? And he said, well, there are photographs of the coat in its original condition. Now, see, this is what we have with the John Kennedy car. We have the car in its original condition, and the interior was destroyed. See, we've never seen John Kennedy's car. Well, they asked him questions. Well, don't you have orders of where the shirt sleeve would be, or the cufflinks, or the coat sleeve? And he says, well, no, I guess they're destroyed. We'll wind up now.
We're out of time.
Out of time.
Got to move.
Okay.
So by next week, we'll probably have even more information to try and squeeze into 1 hour.
Okay. It's a lot of information, but I think you can all absorb it and not have the news media play down to you what's happening. We're trying to relate some facts.
Thank you, Mae.
This has been Dialogue Conspiracy, a public affairs presentation of KLRB News. If you have questions that you want answered on future programs, or any comments, write Dialogue Conspiracy, KLRB, Box 3904, Carmel, California 93921. I'm Phil Kogan.
RBFM in Carmel.
For you friends, a complete price, only $2,500 and easy monthly payments for a week, twice a week, and never on Sunday.
I'll take it. I'll take it. I can't wait to get away from it all.
With the economy in the state that it's in, we at the Sound Cellar felt that we should come up with a good stereo system that you can afford. We've put together the Kenwood 2120 receiver, the Girard 40B automatic record changer with the Shure M3D magnetic stereo cartridge, and a pair of Creative 11 dual-cone speakers. This perfectly matched stereo system sounds as good as the price, only $229. Separately, this system would cost over $350. So come down to the Sound Cellar now and save $126 on this good stereo system. The Sound Cellar, the very best in high...